Hello and welcome to the second session of History of Western and Indian Art. In the first session, we discussed about the Post-Impressionism, its beginnings and influences. In this session, we will learn about the major artists of Post-Impressionism, also called as the Post-Impressionist, and their styles in painting. We have already discussed about Post-Impressionism, the movement, in detail. We have also learned about the three major artists, their lives and their works briefly. In this session, we will discuss about regarding the four principal artists and their styles in detail. The major four artists of Post-Impressionism are Paul Cézanne, Georges Seurat, Vincent van Gogh and Paul Gauguin. As we have seen briefly in our last session, Paul Cézanne was born on 19th January 1839 in Aix-en-Provence, where his father had established a bank. He was sent to a boarding school at the age of 13, where he studied almost for 6 years. From the beginning, Cézanne appeared to be fond of loneliness. He could not make many friends during his school days. He went to a free drawing school in Aix to keep himself busy in the evenings. His father, a well-known banker, was against it. He wanted him to become a banker like himself, but young Cézanne protested against it since the very beginning. In 1859, his father bought an estate near Aix. It had been the palace of the province governor in the past. Cézanne liked the location very much and installed his studio inside it. He often painted its surroundings. Initially, his father did not agree at his decision to pursue his career as an artist, but finally Cézanne motivated him. He left law and went to Paris to study painting in 1861. After finally pursuing his career as an artist, Cézanne went ahead to become the most important artist in Post-Impressionism. He was also the leading painter in the 19th century. In 1870, he adopted the Impressionist style in his paintings. Both Impressionist artists and critics did not accept him. He used geometric shapes in his painting and refused to work for models, and combined real and abstract in his paintings simultaneously. The thrilling life of Paris, however, did not make any difference in Cézanne's lonely life. But he enjoyed meeting his school friend and famous novelist Émile Zola, with whom he visited museums and galleries of the city. For the next 20 years, he was active and most of the time in and around Paris. He became friends with the famous Impressionist painters like Edouard Manet, Claude Monet and Auguste Renoir. He married Hortense Ficquet in 1886. In Cézanne's opinion, the most difficult task for an artist was to know how to see his subject. He thought that the artist is supposed to observe the life around him, not just in passing, but deeply. Any sight of nature was him the embodiment of world's eternity. His works are of profound importance in various ways. He constructed his own canvases, be it landscape, a still life, or a figurative picture, based on the rules of classical composition with proper symmetry and firmness. At the heart of his works is the accuracy he attempted to achieve by painting the same subjects over and over again to capture what he saw, to express what he felt. Cézanne wanted his paintings to remain visually flat. To achieve the three-dimensional qualities in his works, he stressed on the placement of objects very specifically in his paintings. Instead of using scientific perspective, which restricts the object to a painting to be seen from one angle only, he believed in multiple vanishing points and hence gave up the linear perspective used by his predecessors. Cézanne painted the entire canvas with the same vibrant color to rid it from the burden of foreground, middle ground and background. He used very thick paint and very heavy brush strokes during his early years because of the influence of the Impressionist. Being keenly observant of his subjects, Cezanne would see them as different shapes from multiple perspectives that could be placed next to each other to make new forms in themselves. Cezanne spent a lot of time creating his works, slowly building upon previous figure. It sometimes took him months to finish a portrait or a still life. In his lifetime, Cezanne painted some key works like Man with a Cap, painted between 1965 to 66. Cezanne altogether painted 9 portraits of his maternal uncle in 1960s. With the sombre dignity of this figure, thick brushstrokes resembling like clay, sharp drawing and dramatic contrast of colors, these portraits are brilliantly depicted and are best examples of his mastery over color, line and composition. A modern Olympia painted by Cezanne in 1972-73 is considered to be one of the pioneering works which made Cezanne the master of modernism. This painting is inspired by Edouard Manet's famous painting Olympia, which itself was inspired from Titian's Venus of Urbino. Cezanne has presented his own version of his time in modern Olympia of the age-old subject that was popular in decades before Cezanne began working. The modern Olympia became famous not only because of the subject that Cezanne had chosen, but also because of his rendering of the nude, which was painted inside the canvas. Unlike Mani's Olympia, who stares at the spectator, or Titian's Olympia, who is the epitome of grace, Cezanne's Olympia ceases to be a nude or a female at all and becomes part of the painting itself. She is almost like an onion, apple or orange in the still life of Cezanne, becoming just a contour filled with color and an experiment in Cezanne's work of planes and basic forms. Another of his very important and famous work is a self-portrait which he painted between 1873 to 76. This work was hailed by Picasso as my one and only master, father of us all. In this work, Cezanne has combined his impressionistic skills adopted during his stay in Paris, and has tried to see the light which falls on the face in the form of planes and contours, using the ideas of multiple vanishing points which he had already begun experimenting. Still Life with a Bucket of Apples, which Cezanne painted in 1890 to 95, is believed to be one of the most famous works done by this artist. It is often said that because Cezanne's painting technique was very slow and he was unable to use real flowers and apples because they would wilt and rot before he was able to finish the painting, he used artificial flowers and fruits. But despite all this, it is said that no other artist has brought such pictorial life to nature moth. What is also special about this painting is that Cezanne has used brilliant compositions in color to make the painting more interesting. Even what makes his oranges or apples so special is not just the life that he has been able to render in the work, but also the color compositions which maintain interest of the spectator throughout the painting as your eyesight travels from one apple to another. Another of important work which Cezanne painted was Madame Cezanne in Red, painted between 1890 to 95. Cezanne often said that the goal of all art is human face. In more than 25 oils and numerous watercolors, sketches and drawings, the artist has portrayed his wife with sober tenderness. Mont Saint-Victor, painted during 1904 to 06, he has used the multiple parallel strokes and isolated dashes, creating a rectangular rhythm independent of the landscape in his painting. The large bathers, which Cezanne painted between 1898 to 1905, is the most ambitious work ever done by this artist. He never painted from naked models, instead, he assembled his nude compositions from photographs. Rocks in the Forest, painted between 1894 to 98, is beautifully modulated with colors and conveys a somber tone against which plays a lyrical movement carried by the slender trees. Cézanne's work, like The Bathers, which was his most ambitious project, stands out as a work of modernism, not just because of his use of color, but the way he has placed the nudes devoid of any virism. You can observe that Cézanne paints human characters and nudes or males almost as if he had been painting the apples in his basket of apples. These nudes represent different actions and are drawn as simply as rhythmic or curved lines drawn by a child. Simplicity that Cézanne could bring in his works was one of his characteristics that made artists of the next generation wonder and began the second master of post-impressionist, George Seurat, is again a very important artist of this period who led to an ism called as pointillism. Seurat was born on 2nd December 1859 in Paris. At the age of 15, he studied drawing at the municipal school. Subsequently, he entered the Fine Arts School in 1878. It was there that he developed an interest in color theory. During his developing years as an artist, Impressionism was in vogue. He was quick to take the influence of his contemporaries. However, his quest for art did not end here. For him, using scientific advances of his time in art was a necessity. He developed interest in reading essays on chemistry and color theory. Like his artist rebels of his time, the Salon jury rejected his painting. Instead of making repeated attempts to get recognition from the Salon, he turned his back on the conventional artistic exhibitions and started combining art and science in his work. Seurat invented a new style of painting, which is today known as pointillism. He is also known as the father of pointillism. With this method of painting, he achieved his aim of extending his impressionist foundations further. During the late 19th century, scientists had begun to take great interest in color theory. Using the theories of contemporary scientists like Chevreul, Seurat began to construct his chromatic circle. Theories of color were based on fundamental principles that when two colored dots overlap each other, the third color would be formed. It meant that there was no need to mix the colors together and the vibrancy of colors could be retained as fresh as they were first squeezed from the tube. He thus began painting using fresh drabs of primary and secondary colors which were freshly acquired from pigments by placing red next to yellow to get an orange, to place blue next to red to get violet, or to place yellow next to the blue to get greens. This made Seurat's works highly vibrant and very attractive to the eyes. Because of his pointillist theory, Seurat also had to work on a very large scale because it was almost impossible to paint with dabs of color on a very small canvas. Also, because his technique was to put tiny dots of paint in one part of the painting, he could not paint the entire canvas at a single time and had to paint in small portions. This also led him to make very few works of pointillism as more work went into precision and putting in the points of colors in smaller parts. He had a deep essence of light and initially he experimented in black and white drawings. These drawings were often meticulous in detail and technique. You can observe this in this early work of Seurat, which is a portrait. He has been able to achieve the shade and light using only black and white dots done with extreme precision. His later career was marked by a keen interest in science of color and light. His use of color in his paintings is linked to the theories of science and emotion. Seurat's famous masterpiece, A Sunday Afternoon on the Island of La Grande Jatte, demonstrates his gifted talent of pointillism aptly. His warm use of colors perfectly supports his language and the mood of the grand painting. The beauty of this painting also lies in the way color is distributed on the surface of the canvas. Only the darkest portion of it are painted with shades of black. The rest of the painting is painted in startling bright colors, done only with the use of points. One hindrance that we observe in Seurat's technique is that this early work of pointillism looks very stationary. The figures that are placed in the Grand Jatte or the big garden look relaxed but at the same time are posed and not in natural movement as you see in the Olympia of Cezanne. Georges Seurat established his style on the imaging photographic technique and physics of color. His pointillist techniques look very similar to film grains. Throughout his artistic career, Seurat's focus was on color and light. The figures in his paintings are almost reduced to just shapes, not living beings. A highly calculated geometry of composition creates an abstract effect in his paintings. A variety of hues and tints and their values is created by masterly placing color dots side by side with profound thinking and sharp focus on light and shade. Figures in all his paintings look very still and statue-like, similar to ancient Egyptian sculptures. Seurat's subject is modern life and his paintings. The entire body of his work can seem to be strict and rigid because he, unlike other post-impressionists, painted according to the worked-out theories, not what he saw or felt. In this sense, Seurat's works are quite emotionless. From outdoor to studio-based subject and from small dots to large brushstrokes, Seurat relentlessly pursued his passion for amalgamation of art and science. Due to the time-consuming nature of his painting techniques, he could paint only 7 canvases until his early death at the age of 31 in 1891. Another of his famous works are the Grand Circus, which is much more livelier than the Grand Jatte, with a number of activities happening on the canvas. Also, what is interesting is the amount of luminosity of artificial yellow light inside the tent that Seurat has been able to achieve, in contrast to the natural light effects that he had achieved in the Grand Jatte. The most famous artist of all times, Vincent van Gogh, is one of the most important post-impressionist artists too. Vincent van Gogh is popular in all households not only for his works of art but also for his life. Van Gogh was born on 30th March 1853 in a village called Groot Zundert in Dutch Brabant. He was odd and aloof child who eventually became grim, melancholic and difficult to love, also suicidal in his adulthood. His father, a Lutheran minister himself, wanted him to become an art dealer. Therefore, at the age of 16, he was sent to work in Goupil Galleries, which had been founded by his uncle. His vocation made him spend hours in museums and art galleries. Gradually, he developed a keen interest in sketching and started copying the great masters in the museums. Totally uninterested in his job as an art dealer, Van Gogh left the gallery and returned to his house in early 1876. He then opted for teaching languages in Ramsgate, subsequently after leaving a couple of other jobs which didn't interest him either. After that, he went to Amsterdam to study theology and on to Brussels where he followed a course on preaching. He was appointed as a missionary in a mining district in Belgium. During his stay there, he came across the hardships and poverty of the miners and often donated them whatever he had. It was a period in which he wore himself out both mentally and physically and could never recover his health. The only consistent relationship that Van Gogh had throughout his life consistently was with his brother Theodore. Most of the ideas of post-impressionist and the actual ongoings of this period in Paris come to us through the letters exchanged between Van Gogh and his brother Theo. During the summer in 1880 in Belgium, Van Gogh took a decision of his life to become a painter. He explained this to his brother Theo, who from then on helped him throughout his life in every way he could. His life was full of troubles, and he remained restless throughout, wandering from place to place in search of artistic solace. During his time in Belgium, when he decided to make painting his career, Van Gogh has painted some of the most emotionally exuberant works of his life, which might not be considered classical pieces of art today. Being covered in soot himself, he made drawings of the workers and the women who also worked along in the mines and are true pictures of their misery and hard work, although maybe not anatomically perfect. In May 1889, he had a fit because of the misery that he was going through mentally and entered the mental asylum, his health becoming increasingly unstable. On July 27, 1890, he suffered a severe attack of madness and shot himself. He died 2 days later with his brother Theo and his friend and admirer, Dr. Gachet, by his side. Van Gogh, although lived for some time in Paris, could not really make himself comfortable in this urban city. In the middle of his artistic career, he went to live in Arles, where he thought he could find solace and beauty of nature, which he could depict in his works. His earliest work is Potato Eaters, which he painted influenced from the works of Millet, who was an expert in painting who was influenced by communism and painted the hardworking folk of his town. Van Gogh thus tried to achieve what Millet might have achieved in his works by painting the hardworking farmers who at the end of the day pick potatoes and eat them satisfied. After he came to Paris, he saw the works of Impressionists and for the first time observed that so much color could be there in the paintings. The part of Holland where Van Gogh was brought up was still much behind the ideas of France and England in the terms of art. Van Gogh thus was very keen to paint with the yellows and reds and blues, but was always in poverty as he could not sell any of his works. Van Gogh's training as an artist was as erratic as his earlier efforts to become a missionary, because he came late into artistic vocation. He largely remained a self-taught artist. Upon moving from Amsterdam to Paris, he was greatly interested in what he saw around. He also came across the works of post-impressionists like Cezanne and Gauguin. Adopting their works of applying color, he developed a unique painting style of his own. He would often work in a very rapid pace because of his personal anxiety and also his anxiety to create the work of art as earliest as possible. Many times his pace was so rapid that he could produce one work in a day. In a span of 10 years as an artist, Van Gogh produced 2,000 and more works of art, comprising of 900 paintings and 1,100 drawings and sketches. However, he could sell only one painting in his entire lifetime. Many times he was in such a rush to finish his work and also to capture the fading and gaining light in the atmosphere that he could not wait to remove the colors from the tube and spread them with the brush. He directly used the tubes on his canvas, and thus his paintings have very thick layers of colors and also the vibrancy and speed of the artist himself. He had a natural, self-taught and hurried artist, because of which he could not attract the art lovers of his time. His strange use of direct tubes on the canvas, applied as thick as furrows, strange perspectives, firm outlines, and thrilling use of color became the trademark of his style in the later years to come. Van Gogh, who became friends with Seurat when he came to Paris, was fascinated by the usage of pointillism technique and used it in his own way, applying paint in multiple directions instead of methodological dots. His distorted forms and colors convey a unique sense of inner feelings. His paintings have textured surface which was never seen before. He used extremely vibrant colors in his work, sometimes straight from the tubes. He always expressed his own feelings about people and scenes which he painted. His swirling brushstrokes bristle with energy and emotional power. Yellow was his favorite color, as we can see in his famous works like Sunflower and the series he painted in Arles. Among his famous paintings are Starry Nights and his Sunflowers. In 1885, after his father's demise, Van Gogh suffered a financial crunch and went first to Antwerp in winter and then to Theo in Paris, where he spent his next 2 years. During this time, he further developed his technique. He met artists like Pissarro, Seurat, Signac, and Gauguin. He grew closer to Paul Gauguin after he went to Arles to rest. He thus invited Gauguin to join him there. Gauguin arrived in the October of 1888, and for the next 2 months, both worked extremely well together. Being utterly different in character, their endless arguments made the situations extremely difficult. In a fit of madness in the December of 1888, Van Gogh attacked Gauguin with a razor blade and ended by cutting off his own ear in order to punish himself. Life became increasingly unhappy and painful for him after this feat and madness and his attack on Gauguin. His work suffered considerably. Ultimately, he said goodbye to the world after a prolonged period of furious activity and depression when he was unable to accomplish anything. Contradictorily, Van Gogh has painted some of his most beautiful and vibrant paintings which blossomed with happiness when he was in the mental asylum under treatment. The greatness that Van Gogh eventually achieved was preceded by long and painstaking periods of exhausting studies and consistent doubts. Notorious for his eccentricities, Van Gogh painted some of the most famous works in the world. His important works include Potato Eaters, which he painted in 1885. Van Gogh worked on this painting for a long time during his stay at Nuenen. It marks the end of the first stage of his development as an artist. The painting is a deep reflection of his love for the earth and peasants who worked on it. The artist's bedroom, which is painted in 1888, shows his passion for jarring colors and conflicting brushstrokes in instantly recognizable painting. The Sunflowers is one of his most celebrated series. He painted the series in 1888 when he was living in Arles. He decorated the little yellow house at Arles with several paintings of sunflowers, the majority of which were done during the stay there. It is surprising to note that most of these paintings of sunflowers were painted when he had those fits of madness, and yet the flowers or the paintings do not reflect any of it. Cypresses, which he painted in 1889, shows the intense strain of emotion which Van Gogh felt. This intense force is depicted through the abrupt brushstrokes in his works. Starry Night is one of the most famous works and the masterpiece of the style that Van Gogh achieved. In this work, Van Gogh has represented the movement of stars and the feeling that we get because of the traveling light in the night sky. The painting is full of energy and exuberant and looks almost as fresh as a morning sky. This painting is the view from the window of his asylum room at Saint Rene de Provence, just before the sunrise. The self-portrait of Van Gogh, when he cut off his ear after fighting with Goya, is one of his famous works painted in 1889. Following his violent breakdown in Arles, Van Gogh produced this painting in asylum at Saint Rene 4 months later. This is one of his self-portraits and becomes famous because of the representation of his feat of madness. Paul Gauguin, as we have already discussed, is one of the artists who has influenced a number of isms for almost 50 years after his own work came about. He was a successful stockbroker who gave up his career and left his family to become an artist at the age of 35. Gauguin was born in Paris in 1848. His father was a radical journalist and his mother, Aline Chazal, the daughter of feminist and socialist. He was interested in art since his childhood. In free time, he would do painting and visit galleries and museums, also frequently purchase works from emerging artists. This brought him to form friendships with many young artists of his times. He began his artistic vocation as a Sunday painter, using the Impressionist style to which he had been introduced by Camille Pissarro. Once he had made his decision to become an artist, his commitment to art was total. Gauguin began his painting career with Impressionist techniques, but soon identified his shortcomings. He needed a place and culture where ideas were still left emotionally rather than played with intellectually, as was the case with Impressionists. His quest led him to Brittany, a part of France that still retained the sense of primitiveness. He quickly found a haven to settle there. He took with him the young painter Émile Bernard. A few years later, after the two painters fought over an argument, they separated. Gauguin was never good at retaining friends for a very long time. He enjoyed the cut and thrust of argument and remained open to ideas throughout his life. This urge to test his theories against the artist he admired led him to Vincent van Gogh with an ultimately tragic end. Gauguin too, like Van Gogh, was always under emotional turbulence and tried to commit suicide and end his life a couple of times in unsuccessful attempts. He ultimately died of old age. He pursued his quest for the primitive to its logical conclusion. In 1891, he left France for the South Seas and reached Tahiti. He finally found the subjects. Tahiti supplied him with new subject matter, which seemed to him both mysterious and poetic. He no longer had to distort reality as harshly he had to do in Brittany. This new land appeared sufficiently magical and full of symbols. There was no need for Gauguin to impose them on his work. They were part of reality. The paintings that he did in Tahiti are far more graceful and fully modeled, with less heavy outlines. The laws of perspective are not violently overthrown, the foreground and the middle ground are clearly established and the figures are gracefully adorned over it. Gauguin had a primitive style in art. His forms were completely simplified. The shapes in his paintings were generally outlined like the Egyptian, medieval, and Oriental art. He used bright colors to express his feelings. In his works, after he found his own style, he depicted native Tahitians and their island settings in his paintings. Gauguin's later years were full of health issues and poverty. Fortune did return to him, though very late, when his illness had already made him weak. He died on 8th of May 1903. He was an active observer who believed in the source of inspiration for an artist to be internal, not external. Therefore, he looked for symbolic, not natural colors. These are the reasons why he was an influence for the later symbolists. His important works include Cows at the Watering Place, which he painted in 1885, The Yellow Christ, in which Gauguin was interested in simple religious cults, and the figure of Christ is thus based on crucifix in a chapel near Avon. This work remarkably stands out because of the use of yellow, which is in the background, done on the body of the Christ too. Self-portrait of Gauguin, which he painted in 1897, is marked by his ill health and poverty of his later years. One of his most important works is Where Do We Come From? What Are We? Where Are We Going? Which he painted in 1898. The suffering and adversity forced Gauguin to try and interpret the world in a philosophical way. Several drawings and painted studies were the basis for a large painting summing up his ideas. The four artists that we learn today are different from each other in every aspect. Their lifestyles, work styles, techniques, goals, aims, and intentions are completely different when they painted their works. However, the common thread that bound them together was their quest for breaking away from Impressionism and exploring